So I've been talking with the voter registration people over at the county, as you do. And
As you do.
I
Just
do
a
it
Thursday.
lot too. They kind of hate me. But I was asking to get like updated voter registration numbers for our county, and they had them, like they updated it 2 days ago. And guess, Democrat or Republican leaning, guess to which direction and by how much the city of Sacramento is swayed by one party or another.
By how many percents?
Yeah, like D plus, X, R plus X.
So how many percentage points is the Democratic Party up against the Republican Party, or up
within
against
our city limits
in Sacramento?
Registered voters.
I'm gonna guess
thinking about this
like
so
I'm gonna
hard.
guess like 35.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think I was gonna say like, I don't know, like 27.
I say 40.
I think it's higher. Yeah, I think it's higher.
Skylar just got it basically it's like 39.5, but if you round up, it's D plus 40. Which, like, all of these people are always talking about how this is like not that, progressive of a place, which is not, right? But it is full on D plus 40 here. There's no excuse for not being able to pass the things that people would want them to pass.
Wait, Dave, but I'm confused because I keep hearing that the only way to get anything done is to vote blue no matter who. This seems like it runs counter to that extremely well thought out political theory that people keep throwing around on Facebook.
I feel like we're drowning in blue whoos and nothing is happening here. So I think
blue whoos. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that was never the problem. I mean, that's why I keep calling it out, because I think that there is a problem where we just, like, because there is a Republican Party, the Democrats will always kind of try to make that their enemy, even when they live in a place where, like, that's not your opposition, right? Like,
where the Republican Party is basically completely irrelevant.
Yeah, we live in a state with a supermajority in both houses and a Democratic governor, and we live in a city with the entire council being Democrats. Like, yeah, they're supposed to be nonpartisan, but like, this is not a place where we have to play, party politics. It's a matter of will. Mm-hmm. And I think that fits in really nicely with the New York Times article from the last couple of days from the mayor of Minneapolis, which is the title of which is like, I've seen white liberals, completely stall progress. And I think it's racism. Like, I mean, I think when you're in a place like this, it calls it out so much easier than when you're in a place where you actually do have Republicans that you can say are like holding up progress.
Enemy, right. Yeah. I mean, that's our city council. Yeah. You just described them. That's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. It's a whole bunch of Democrats who literally cannot throw enough money at the cops in a time when like all of their constituents are calling out for defunding them.
Yep.
Wonderful. Great. Yep. Cool.
Yeah. And they also are just like, let's wait and we just have to like workshop, and like talk a little bit more and we'll come up with better ideas. Meanwhile,
pragmatism, incrementalism.
Oh my gosh. Yep. And the ideas that they come up with are ideas that have been introduced for fucking years and years and years before. Like, we have they're all monsters. They're all
brand new initiative coming at you with 2014 ideals. We also, District 3, I was looking at the county soups too. District 3, Susan Peters' seat, she's leaving. Long time evil Republican as well. This district is D plus 13 now. It's wild how quickly our county has changed in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, insofar, I mean, in as much as that matters, apparently. I guess rather have a Democrat in her seat,
We'll see if the Republican cop for life gets the seat, because Republicans the world over are throwing money into the race at him, because it's been a beautiful bottleneck for them on getting any progress done. Anyway, what a fun and enjoyable intro. Let's get the show started.
Yeah, speaking
It's
of
gonna
getting
be-
progress
it's gonna
done,
be
let's
such
fucking
a
talk
good
about
show.
something.
The tone has been set.
All right.
Let's do it.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And Skylar.
And Shannon.
And Flo.
And we have a special guest today in Britta Guerrero, the CEO of the Sacramento Native American Health Center, aka SNAHC. How are you doing, Britta?
Fine, thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Flo told me that you two are old friends, so I'm excited for this dynamic tonight.
Yes.
Yes, we met
Yes.
running Ragnar, which is only something that people who don't have good sense do. It's a 200-mile relay that you run over the course of 36 hours or less with 12 people in 2 vans. And you basically run 3 times during this thing, your runners 1 through 12. And yeah, you sleep in a van and you're constantly on the move. And it sounds terrible, but it's really great, but it's kind of terrible too. And yeah, we did that.
Can we?
That is how Britta and I became intimately acquainted. We did this
Yes.
race together.
Yes.
That sounds wild. I think I saw videos of that, of Flo, like you before running, like dancing at the starting line and stuff.
Yes, and you ran overnight. Like there's always somebody out there running from your team. So for the 30 hours that you're out there, somebody is running the whole time.
That sounds really fun, actually. Like running at like 2 a.m.
Yes.
Yes.
I like it.
Unless you get lost. Or
Unless you
I
get
think
lost.
we had someone get lost.
Yes.
Oh my God. I'd never even
Okay.
heard of this.
Yeah, they have them all
Does it-
over the country. We did the Napa Valley one. I've done the Northwest Passage, which is basically running from Canada back to Seattle. And I've also done the Southern California one, which is running from like Huntington Beach to San Diego.
Wow. That's amazing.
If one of you guys gets lost, doesn't that kind of set you back for the whole race?
It does. I mean, you can, in that case, you can like pick your runner up and get them back on course, or you can there are ways to kind of figure it out because you do have a van. The goal is hopefully not to have that happen, but it can when you have like some of the paths that like have lots of twists and turns and somebody misses a
Yes.
sign.
Did any of you get lost?
I did not.
Not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing.
This does not sound like a way that I would choose to spend my extracurricular
I know it sounds
time.
terrible, and it kind of is, but it's also great.
I mean, there's like certain kinds of people, and I am not that. I appreciate and respect that if that's the way you have fun. You know,
Not for you.
I have fun in different ways.
So, Britta, we're not having you on today to talk about running, though. You are the CEO of SNAHC, and we, in our previous episode, we're sort of beginning a discussion on decolonization and what that means. I think that's sort of at the forefront of conversation lately with Trump's sort of off-kilter speech last Friday. In front of Mount Rushmore, and then people throughout the country tearing down both Confederate statues as well as other, colonizer statues such as Christopher Columbus and Junipero Serra. So we want to discuss that with you, but I also wanted to start out with a moment to talk about SNAHC because it's a really amazing place. So could you?
I've always in my head, when I see that acronym, I think snatch. Like when I drive by it. This is the first
That
I'm
would
hearing of
also be
snack. And
correct.
HC.
I think I'm going to go with snack from here on in. I think that's better. I'm glad about that.
So Sacramento Native American Health Center.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so tell us about its history, why it was formed, and sort of what services are provided today.
So we're a federally qualified health center. That means that we get federal funding and a federal match to serve the most vulnerable or underserved, disenfranchised populations. So we are focused on the Native American community, but we're open to everyone who is in need of health services. So Medi-Cal dependent, uninsured, underinsured, cash pay folks, and we have primary care, we have comprehensive dental, behavioral health, specialty care, a lot of outreach into the community, a lot of prevention-based programs that are focused on youth and adults. We have a home visitation program. We have a lot of things going on all the time. We just purchased property in South Sacramento, and we will be moving to Franklin and Florin, doubling our footprint. And we're opening a youth center that will be kind of community-based youth services. So kids can come in and seek services themselves while they're doing a number of other things in a prevention-based way. So engaging kids and helping them to understand that there are people around who can help them, not in a traditional therapy setting. So we're doing something pretty neat in South Sacramento.
That's amazing. You know, one major, we have a million major problems in our healthcare system today. One really big one is our lack of mental health care. And I personally know a number of people who have been like saved, like really helped by SNAHC. And so I've always really thought very highly of, you know, what it is you're all about. Did you speak a little bit about sort of the history when it all started?
Sure. So Sacramento had a Native American health center that was opened in the 70s, and they closed in the early 2000s. And so basically Congress has identified several places across the state that get urban allocation for healthcare funding from OMB to take care of Native American people that they placed elsewhere. So through the Indian Relocation Act, which was a federal program that took
Jackson?
Indian.
Okay.
Yeah. So took Indians off the reservation and put them in urban areas so that we could assimilate. And Sacramento was one of those locations. So based on our treaty rights to healthcare, housing, and education, the government has to provide healthcare services for underserved Indians. So we take that money and we leverage it through additional services to the community at large.
Okay.
So
yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like,
yeah.
what is the logic behind a Native American health center versus just a health center, right?
Yeah. Well, we're a nonprofit, but we have a governing board that is required to be 51% Native American run. So we have a Native American directed organization to make sure that it actually serves our community, but then also the community at large is taken into consideration, obviously heavy consideration, because Indian people, Native American people, Native American is weird for me because we're kind of older than America. So I'm always, it's a conundrum when somebody says it. I'm like, what?
Yeah, what terminology should we lean towards?
I grew up Indian, so I've always been Indian, and then there was kind of the American Indian, and then American Indians were actually East Indians, so then people were confused, and people would say like, oh, are you East Indian? And I would say, oh, no. I mean, not that I am not that, but it's just I'm super proud of who I am. And so I think we have moved to this place of now we are Indigenous people, and I'm liking that more, but you will hear me revert back to the non-politically correct term of saying that I'm Indian because that's how I grew up, but Indigenous is good.
Okay.
There was a question in there and I lost it.
Yeah, well, I guess I had I was asking about, what a Native American health center was, and I think you were kind of diving into that.
Yeah. So we try to do everything respectful of the first people who were here. And so this land was and still is the land of the Nisenan people. And so one of the beauties of Sacramento is that we have a lot of relocatees, so a lot of Indians from out of state, but we're also surrounded by multiple tribes. So throughout the Central Valley and the foothills, we have the Southern Maidu, the Central Valley Miwok, and the Me-Wuk people. And then west of the American River, we have Patwin, Wintu, and Wintun people. So I'm an out-of-state Native person, and so being in Sacramento is just such a unique place and a unique space that I just feel so blessed to be here on this land, that saying the names of the tribes who are here and how our organization interacts with local tribes, and also has created a space for out-of-state Indians to find their home and to be connected to one another has just been an absolute joy for me.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. You must serve a whole number of nations, right?
Yeah.
And what's it like for folks to interact and sort of get a little bit deeper in touch with that side?
Well, I think you hear a lot of conversation about being culturally competent, and that kind of speaks to people being incompetent. And so that's a weird term too. I feel like because I'm a Native person, I also have to be culturally humble because I don't know everyone's background or perspective, or, we serve everyone, Spanish speakers, Black community, like what are their needs? And we try to deliver services in a way that takes into account the physical, spiritual, and emotional person. So it's whole person care, and it's patient-centered. So it's not just what the physician wants, and you can't be non-compliant. It's you decide how your healthcare works, but also being competent or culturally humble means that you meet patients where they are, and if they're not Native, we also respect that. And we try to help them get connected to whatever their spiritual center is, or whatever their culture is, or wherever they find strength, because healthcare is rough and it's a journey and it requires all of these components. And if people are not connected to who they are, it can be more difficult.
Does anybody else have any questions about SNAHC?
Not about SNAHC per se, but Britta, I'm curious if you can say a little bit about, because we are in a pandemic right now, what has been the impact for the Native American community or the Indigenous community, as it were, because I know we've heard a lot about the disparities as it relates to Black and Latinx communities. There hasn't been as prominent a conversation about what's been happening with our Indigenous, siblings. So it'd be great to be able to have you weigh in on that since it's happening right now.
Well, so Sacramento was a little bit late to the party, and I know you'll be surprised by this, but they weren't gathering any demographic information on folks. So at the time they started testing, they were only gathering race and ethnicity data on about 30% of the folks who had been tested. And everyone loves that motor group, that more than one race group when it comes to data, because it's that's where they stick everyone that they can't identify with their eyes. So if you look what people might think of as Latino, or your name ends with a vowel, they check the Latino box, which I think one of the struggles of the Native American community or the Indigenous community is visibility. So I think what the Black community deals with in anti-Blackness, we deal with Indigenous invisibility. So we're missing in data, we're missing in healthcare, we're missing. People have heard about missing and murdered Indigenous women. We go missing and no one notices. It's like we're completely missing from the landscape. And so in the more than one races where we usually find ourselves, and so extracting that data is obviously pretty difficult. So we do have a lot of pre-existing conditions, chronic conditions, co-occurring disorders, high morbidity rates. And so when we are exposed to something like COVID, the rate of intensive care and death is at a higher rate. We're right there with the Latino community, except that our numbers are so low, but our infection rate numbers are quite high.
Yeah.
And we're undercounted. So when it comes to data, we win the oppression Olympics in most cases. And I hate to use that term, but it's real.
Yeah.
When you talk about being missing in all of these senses, when you're missing from data and from these sort of these government files and things like that, that also by proxy makes it so the Native American community is missing from public discourse. They're not in news stories as often. And I think we do not hear nearly as much as we need to, you know, the story of the Indigenous experience in California. Can you speak to that a little bit, and what are we as members of the media getting wrong?
Yeah, well, I think members of the media, members of Western society get most of it wrong because everything has been based on non-truth. And so I think what we've learned in school are these sanitized versions of history. You know, Christopher Columbus, 1492, sailed, you know, the ocean blue. I actually remember the story, and I know that, you know, Chris Columbus was kind of like a third place loser who showed up fourth or fifth. And he was a horrible person and documented sharing Indigenous girls as young as 7 and 8 years old with his men, and, you know, killing and enslaving, and, you know, how easy we were to conquer, because here we saw these, you know, very fair-skinned folks dying, and we came in and saved the day. And how are we repaid for that? Was through being murdered, and then ultimately genocide under government policies. But I think you start with all of the different levels of kind of lies on top of lies on top of lies on top of lies, so that there's a hero and a villain, and we are usually the villain. And so, you know, Wipe Out the Savages, I remember seeing that on TV in a John Wayne movie, and I thought, holy shit, those look like some really bad guys. And then I learned I was one of them, and I was like, oh shit, like I don't know that I'm...
How did that happen?
When did this happen? No Native person that I know is a savage or, you know, has these violent tendencies. And I think the same way you hear the term black on black crime, you hear, well, tribes were killing each other anyway. And I'm like, okay,
right.
But we didn't wipe each other out and wipe each other off the face of the planet. We conquered the tribe, and then we took you in.
Right.
And we took care of you, and we brought you along to be one of our people. And so it was like a culture shift for sure, but we didn't wipe you out. It was just it's a lot of untruths. And so we're missing from a lot of things on purpose. Government policies, we had Indian extermination policies in California where you actually could get $20 for a California Indian scalp and $5 for an Indian child scalp. And I'm not from California, so my tribe has treaties with the government, and by the time they got to California, they had perfected the system of extermination and wiped out Native American people and did not leave them with land. So they kind of figured out how to really exterminate and eradicate the Indian problem by the time they arrived here.
Yeah.
How do
It's a
we
little
begin?
heavy for a freaking Thursday night.
No, I
We tend
appreciate
to be
you
rude
bringing
that
that
way.
up, because you touched on a really important point that I think we can't drive home enough, which is that this was not like there's constantly this argument that, you know, people conquered people enslaved people, that this was happening all over the world. And it was like, and historians will tell you, but not like this.
No.
And so that part can't be understated.
No.
And so I appreciate you for bringing that up.
Yeah. This is some diabolical shit that happened. Like some real like war game mental fuck stuff that happened that you could not think to be this evil if you had tried, like in the deepest, darkest depths of your dark places, could you find a way to dehumanize people in such a way that everyone sees a baby. Doesn't matter what color they are. They haven't become a bad, dark criminal yet. Everybody sees a black baby and they say, oh, look at this beautiful baby. Okay, so how do we decide we want to kill that baby? Like, what happens in your mind that makes that okay? And it's the same thing with an indigenous baby. You see this beautiful little baby, but how do you get to a place that's so ugly that you can think to kill an infant or a pregnant woman? Like, how do you kill an elder and take pride in that? It's still very, this was a federal policy. It's not hidden. If you look it up, it exists, and it's not that old.
Yeah. Well, you know, just 7 blocks from SNAHC is Sutter's Fort, right?
Yes.
And we have multiple things in Sacramento named after John Sutter. And, you know, the region had, in many ways, sort of deified, glorified this man. Could I read a little excerpt from a book about him?
Sure.
I think it's from the Memoirs of Theodore Cordwa. When Sutter established himself in 1839 in the Sacramento Valley, new misfortune came upon these peaceful natives of the country. Their services were demanded immediately. Those who did not want to work were considered as enemies. With other tribes, the field was taken against the hostile Indian. Declaration of war was not made. The villages were attacked usually before daybreak when everybody was still asleep. Neither old nor young were spared by the enemy, and often the Sacramento River was colored red by the blood of the innocent Indians, for these villages usually were situated at the banks of the rivers. During a campaign, one section of the attackers fell upon the village by way of land. All the Indians of the attacked village naturally fled to find protection on the other bank of the river. But there they were awaited by the other half of the enemy, and thus the unhappy people were shot and killed with rifles from both sides of the river. Seldom an Indian escaped such an attack, and those who were not murdered were captured. All children from 6 to 15 years of age were usually taken by greedy white people. The village was burned down, and the few Indians who had escaped with their lives were left to their fate. Again, that's kind of heavy for a Thursday night too. But this is one of those very few sort of conflicting narratives to what we were taught as kids, you know, I'm not from Sacramento, but I'm sure all of the Sacramento grade school kids would go to Sutter's Fort and churn butter, right? And learn about all the great things of the fort. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to sort of talk more about like how important narrative is here and how important narrative is to the decolonization process.
Well, if I may, real quick, I just wanted to jump in and say like a narrative that I always find, not only in this, but like basically in any period of time, which is like every period of time where white people have come in and committed atrocities against other people in other countries and whatnot, there's this narrative of like that to like let them off the hook because, well, things were different back then. And if you look at it through the scope of, you know, what was happening back then, it really wasn't considered as monstrous. And so these guys, you know, shouldn't be judged by today's standards. And I just wanted to kind of bolster the point that you made, Britta, that like that's garbage. Like, I don't care how many hundreds of years ago it was. These guys knew that what they were fucking doing was monstrous, you know. And like I've most recently saw it. The what's the guy that the head of the Catholic Church of Sacramento, like diocese or something like that?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
No.
So in regards to the Sarah statue, he used that, you know, to say like, well, we can't judge this guy as this monster. And of course, you know, he got sainted like 5 years ago. So of course the Catholic Church is going to carry some water for him. But it is put in this thing where it's like, oh, and I think the same thing happens when we look at like slavery in the South, where it's like, oh, it was a different time. You know, we can't judge these guys like that. And I don't know. I would just like to point out that, for one, I think that's bullshit. I think these people knew exactly what the fuck they were doing. And yeah, I mean, it is like by any metric from any time period, what happened here and everywhere else in the country to Indigenous people was monstrous, and it happened on purpose. Yeah, I guess it's not a question.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the statue piece is some pretty weird European shit. These statues, I mean, just the concept of a statue, like an icon, like marble or bronze, I mean, it's already like this kind of, they try to romanticize something that isn't romantic. And I saw when they were taking down the Chris Columbus statue that there were Italians there who were crying, and they were saying, you know, this is our culture, this is our heritage. And I feel
the
bad.
World's tiniest violin plays for you guys.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I do. I feel bad for them, but their stories, their heritage was built on lies, and I bet there's pain around that. But that's not my fault, and it's not my community's fault, and it's not Indigenous people's fault that these false narratives were planted and that they felt so much pride in that space. People are doing these 23andMe heritage DNA tests, and all their life they thought they were Jewish, come to find out they're Greek, and they're like, oh, well, now I'm going to change all the knickknacks in my house to be Greek instead of Jewish, and they're cool with it. But if you tell them somebody that they kind of had some idolization of was not truly what they thought, they're like, oh, well, we can't deal with that. So, you know, we're really going to fight this tooth and nail. The truth seems to be hard to come by these days.
I mean, I think if you're someone in 2020 who's still like pulling water for like what a great guy Christopher Columbus was, I don't know what to say to you, man. Like, it's like pretty clear.
Yeah.
Like, Christopher Columbus was a giant piece of shit is a pretty mainstream opinion. At this point, if you're hanging on to that, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. But I think that that's part of it, is that invisibility piece of Native people. It brings upon some white guilt, and it makes people feel bad. And then they have to face what happened. And instead of doing that, they want us to walk around in beads and feathers so that we can be seen, and that's actually not what we look like. I wore slacks and heels to work today, and I still am an Indigenous person in an Indigenous space. And I think that, you know, people will have to come to terms with that at some point, that there were a lot of lies, and in order to get over this, we don't need to get over it.
Right. Yeah.
Folks do.
Absolutely.
I guess I have a question that I know that I have a question. I'm just not exactly sure how to succinctly talk about it, because the real truth is that I'm pretty starstruck having you in the Zoom room.
I was wondering why you weren't talking all episode.
Yeah. Oh, because I'm giggling hard so that I don't piss myself. I was in the Sierra Health Leadership Foundation, the Health Leadership Network, and you were one of the speakers and the only one that I felt, I feel like I'm going to cry, really moved by. So I should have decided not to talk tonight. So it's really great that you're here and sharing your time with us. And I'm going to get my shit together. So we're talking about decolonization and broadly, and then we sort of get into these specifics. And if we understand decolonization as an experience of decentering whiteness and returning things back to the people and place of origin, I'm thinking about you as an Indian woman, also coupling this like work of decolonization with the fight against the patriarchy, which is an essential part of the work of decolonization. And so I guess what I'm interested in hearing from you, if you're even interested in sharing, and if you're not, then that's fine too, because you actually shouldn't be the person doing the work. It should be people that look like Kempa and Skylar.
You mean handsome fellas?
Handsome, well-kempt, single men who are ready,
perspective, empathetic.
Yeah.
Suddenly we this turns into like a dating app.
Dwights. Dwights. That's what Dwights.
Yes.
Or when I love to use the color spectrum, the pound FFFFFF.
Yes. Good. So I think about so you certainly shouldn't have to do the work, though every time we enter into conversations here at Voices, I like to think about them as model conversations for our listeners to pull some tools away from. And so I guess what I'm interested in is, one, just your thoughts about the work of decolonization and fighting the patriarchy as an Indian woman working for people who are pushed into the margins. And also if you have any thoughts about where specifically that work needs to be done in our community, thinking about sort of a call to action that isn't just burn it all down and start over, because that's where I'm at.
Yeah, or if it is,
I mean, if that's it, then cool.
So I think decolonizing, it's really about shifting the way that Indigenous people view ourselves, and then the way non-Indigenous people view Indigenous people. So it's like reclaiming our families, our community, our culture, our language, our history, our traditions that were taken away under federal policies. And we were then assimilated to be like everyone else. And I think we have to slowly or quickly, whatever the case may be for whomever that may be, to start to take a step back and reclaim some of that control, whether that's through agreements or treaties, or you earlier said I'm decolonizing my body. And I think just like Black women had to actually legislate natural hair, that's decolonizing their spaces, that we don't have to be white workers in a white world, that we can show up in our most genuine Indigenous ways. I wear big jewelry. I come from an Indigenous perspective. I have a traditional way of knowing how things should be in order. And I should be able to challenge my non-Native colleagues with this perspective, because their worldview is not the worldview. And so I think I will never be your Western idea of beauty. I show up in my indigenous beauty, trying not to be that. And I think we've been forced to be in a world where you have to wear a Lux cream suit and have a bob haircut and drive a certain car in order to be professional, or in order to be able to raise your economic status. And what we need to do is come as our most authentic selves and show up as who we are, and not have to be the traditional white worker in the white workforce in order to be taken seriously or to be considered professional. I know that I'll hear non-white folks raise their voice and people will be like, oh, they're aggressive, or, oh, you know, you always are so outspoken. Actually, I'm just not saying what you are comfortable hearing. And so I, you know, am not meaning to come at you sideways, but this is my worldview and my perspective. And I'll just say, like, the colonial container is so mediocre. You have to be so vanilla in order to be successful, that I have, and my community has all of this fabulousness outside of the container. And it's like we have worked so hard to make ourselves small to fit it. And we aren't going to do that anymore. And so we indigenize the way we show up, and we are authentic, and we talk about putting, coming from a collective perspective of taking care of all of us instead of the almighty me. I'm so important in that Western worldview that all I care about is myself and my money, and saying, actually, money isn't the most important. The environment that takes care of all of us is the most important, and how we relate to each other is the most important. And we're so backwards. There's so many different examples of that, but we can't fit. We won't fit. We'll never fit in that container. It wasn't built for us. And so all of the structures in government, in the police force, in corporate structures, those structures were never meant to fit us. So they've kept us on the outside for a long time. And then, the tribal structure was taken and kind of reworked and made screwy. And we need to take it back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and while I'm listening to you talk, I think my experience working in direct service with people experiencing homelessness, and in particular, I've spent the last 6 years working with women and families experiencing homelessness, has led me to a place where I am able to recognize the value of a place like SNAHC in our community that has such a, again, which I learned from listening to you talk at the leadership program, being able to come in and sort of like change the narrative there, adopt a mission of like community and support, and be a place where people, like, the medical system is generally not, it is colonized, right? Like, it is not friendly to people without, to the people that you are serving, to people without means. And like, this is a space where community is realized, and all of those things that you talk about being part of your identity as an Indian woman is like, that those things can like come out and be a part of the work that you're doing every day, and a part of the work that the people who are working for SNAHC and for, you know, the mission and vision that has been created, that all of that can sort of be realized slowly but hopefully quickly, because we need it.
Yes.
Happen soon.
Yes.
I see Flo thinking.
I know. I see Flo thinking too.
I had to write some things. Like Britta was like taking me to church, and I was like, I was like, I gotta take some notes. I gotta like, what scripture was that? Like, I was like, because when you were talking about decolonizing the way we show up, the thing that I have been sort of searching for some words for, some language to put behind is like, even the way that we operate feels so colonized in some ways. And what I mean by that is like entire structures were put together, in this country that had no evidence base. I mean, it is the American experiment if we're really thinking about how this government is set up and how we do things. But now anybody who wants to change it has to come along with data to show that what they're going to do is better than what we have here. Like that even the ability to experiment is limited to the people who came here and stole this land and enslaved other people on it and set it up. And you now have to prove that your idea is better before it's even entertained. And so I'm just thinking about this because we had Asantewa on talking about, MH first. And I'm even thinking about how like, whether or not the city of Sacramento even entertains that as a model for how we could do 911 services is going to be predicated on how much they believe and have faith in the data that they have. But the police department doesn't have to provide any data to show that they do anything, right? It's now the onus on people who are doing this work because they see the harm to have to then use the tools of colonization, which is what's written down and what can be documented, right? All of these ways that like entire cultures have just been ignored because they were cultures where things were shared by passing them down word of mouth. So right? Like you learned as an oral tradition the history of and you studied that. That was like, in terms of accuracy, there were a group of people who would study, this is who we are, and you were given it by rote memorization over and over again, and that was passed down by generation to generation. And so if you kill those people, it's like burning a library, right? It's taking away, but that's not prioritized when you have a culture that's set up around writing things down and documenting things. And so it changes even your way of being and even your way of being able to challenge. And so I was just wrestling with this idea of like, you're talking about decolonizing the way that we show up. And I'm like, how do we even do that when anything you do to engage the system has to be done on its terms? You can't come with a good idea and just say, I'd like to have 45% of your city's budget to try this out for a while. Let's see what happens. Nobody is going to give you that money. But if you were here at the beginning and you were a white land, stealing man over the age of 21, you got to have the benefit of that experiment.
Right.
I was just so overwhelmed by it when you said it, Britta, that I was like, it's right there. It's like, it's baked into the way that we operate that now everybody has to come up with a reason to change this system and then has to persuade people to do it when the first people who were colonizers on this land didn't have to do that.
Right. So I guess there's a couple of things. You're saying that you have to show up and prove that your idea is better. I don't think we have to have a totally fully baked idea to prove that it's better. It couldn't possibly be worse.
Amen.
It could not be worse. And so I come from a perspective that in California, we make up 2% of the population, but we make up 9% of the prison population. So how do we care for our people who are on the inside, and how do we keep our own people from continuing this predetermined plan for us? Because there's nothing that has changed. So if a percentage of the population that's in the prison system is 40% Black, then we should get 40% of the prevention dollars on the outside so that we start a trajectory in the opposite direction. And I don't think we have to have a fully baked plan, but we just need the economic resources, and let us figure it out. because we know how to care for each other. And I would go so far as to say that the Black community they're tribal people. They come from tribes in Africa, and being so separated from their roots of who they are, they have been so disconnected from their value that once we start to reconnect the value of everyone has a place, there is no one who's left out, because the system that we create is inclusive of everybody. That once people start feeling valued instead of throwaway type folks, things will start to change. I mean, we never left anybody out. It didn't happen. I mean, it just like, if you see a weakness, you don't cut them. I mean, you bring them in and figure out what their gifts are. And I think there are so many ways where colonization has ruined communities, and I'll use the LGBT community just for an example. When colonizers arrived here, and my tribe is a little bit different, but we have always held the LGBT community as our most sacred beings. Mm-hmm. They had the ability to encompass both the male and the female spirit. And so they were medicine people, they were tribal leaders, they were spiritual guides, there were ceremonies that could not happen without them. And they were so special to be born into a family that it was this gift that everyone rejoiced. And then the Bible came, and they made these beautiful beings to be the opposite of that, because they're so afraid that these folks don't fit in their container. And the container is the structure of what they understand. And so they started to demonize, I mean, God knows, we have had two-spirit folks all the way back to the very beginning of time. And so, I mean, we have words for our two-spirit community folks. And the way that we say that is nedle. And that means as they are. There was no, they weren't a gay person. You didn't have they were just who they were. And there was nothing wrong or bad about that. And then the colonial perspective made that shame and the negativity because they didn't understand it. And I think there's so many situations where what they didn't understand became bad. And I'm not sure about, I don't get the Bible. It's not my story. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know those people. And I'm not saying that it's bad, but it's been demonized in a way that it's been shaped to ruin community, and it's been shaped to ruin other ethnicities and other cultures, and used as a weapon so that we're forced to fit within their construct. And it's just so shameful what's happened, I think, to the LGBT community especially.
Yeah, it's
and now I'm trying to take it back.
It's been a tool of weaponization since, from the beginning of colonization.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you said yet on the show what tribe you are?
Yes, I'm a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe. I'm sorry. I'm from Bylis, B-Town, hey!
I just wanted people to know when you were describing it.
Yeah. So, there's just so much beauty, I think, that they couldn't see because the vision is so narrow.
So can we maybe move on? You were talking about work clothes and things earlier.
Yes.
Can we talk about your shirt right now?
Oh, yeah. Should I get up so you can see it?
She's wearing
I didn't notice
shirt.
that
it's the exact font and similar icon to the Cleveland Major League Baseball team, which is, known as the Cleveland Indians.
Yes.
and the shirt is the Caucasians in the exact same font, and it's this silly looking white guy with blonde hair and a little dollar sign right over his head.
It's so good.
Yeah, the artist nailed that one.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot, and it speaks to our moment. And again, like we were saying, this is the reckoning, right? And I think it's really refreshing to see that it's not just a reckoning for Black lives and Black liberation. It's a reckoning that involves conversations around decolonization and our Indigenous community, right? So, I don't know if, I know we don't have much show left, but right now they're discussing changing the name of the NFL team from Washington, right? Can we talk about what moves like that mean in this process? Are they important? Aren't they? Obviously, they're not the entire story.
Well, I mean, I think it's important because it's embarrassing. I remember actually, I think it was the Cleveland Indians who have the Chief Wahoo is the actual person's name. And as a child, and maybe still now, I might have resembled that. I have a big nose and big ears and a big round head. And I remember being teased about that and called that. And it is a way to, that caricature, to have big ears and a big nose and a big round head. It's like all of the stereotypical way that, you would see kind of the chief in cartoons and things like that portrayed. And I think people, since we're unseen, they still think of us as these mythical creatures that, don't exist anymore. And it actually is hurtful. It's hurtful to young people. I mean, we wouldn't have a team named after a Chinese community, or, I mean, I think the Nets used to be something pretty terrible, and that's gone by the wayside because they wanted Black players. And so since we don't have enough Native players, it doesn't matter. And now we've got a player on the Braves who's like, yeah, I don't love it. It's embarrassing. It makes me feel bad. And so now they're thinking about, okay, how do we change it? The narrative is important because we're real people. We walk around with y'all, and it's actually the Washington team is a racial slur, like in real life. Like look it up in the dictionary. So yeah, I mean, it means that we're being seen, and that we're not historical, mythical, legendary creatures.
That's right.
So,
I think that's a mistake people make too when they try to sort of the first steps of like, unpacking their colonizing tendencies. They tend to sort of other in this weird way of like referring to Indigenous people in this sort of mythical or fantastical way, right? Almost sort of fantasizing, what it is that they have to share with us and what we can learn from them.
Right. It's also like, I don't know, to me, it's like, it's a similar thing to when people are like, well, I'm not racist. Like other races do have differences, but like not all of them are bad. Like Asian people are great at math. It's like, all right, that's still fucking racist.
That's totally
like,
racist.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's just because it's like meant as a compliment.
Yeah.
Like all of these moves to, I think specifically these moves to remove racial slurs from NFL teams, like are these moments in trying to like break people of their historical amnesia, which allows them to forget that this like, which allows them to live into complicity about like what terror has actually happened, right? And how like real indigenous people have been treated like worse than garbage, like people, right? Like, so we start to like, and we've had these conversations before. I mean, how long have we been trying to get the Washington Redskins to not be the Washington Redskins, right? Like, this is not a new conversation.
No.
But we find ourselves in a space now where we can start bringing these things up and like shaking that forgetfulness that is active, because it's not actually a disease. It's like an active process that people are taking a part in. We can shake that the fuck out of them and realize like these things aren't okay. Like, you being silent or complicit in the process is not welcome anymore.
So we use a term like dominant society means like non-natives, like Western type folks. So dominant society people don't get to decide for communities of color what's racist and what isn't. And that's just that. And whether the intention was to be hurtful or not, when we say it's hurtful, then it's hurtful.
Right. That's the end of that conversation. Yeah.
Well, I have an Indian friend and it doesn't bother him. Well, here's a list of all of the organizations that have taken a stand against it. And if your Indian friend has to have some level of self-hatred that he doesn't understand, I'm sorry for him. And he needs to spend some time leveling up, because it's not okay with the rest of us.
Yeah.
Ooh.
All right, Britta, do you have...
and Britta, just on that note, I just want to remind us, because there's so often that people will try to hide behind somebody who is a part of the community to be able to say, well, this person finds it okay. Well, I have a Black friend who lets me use the N-word. And it's just like, you also have to recognize that person is indoctrinated and socialized into anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous culture, all of these things as well, right? And so sometimes they may allow you to do that because that's their own coping mechanism. But that doesn't mean it's okay to take advantage of, right? And I think that's one of the things that we need to be able to learn is our own self-regulation, is just because someone will allow you to do it, does that make it right? And what might be going on with that person in terms of their own sense of self-worth, given that we know that that's the impact of colonization and subjugation.
Absolutely.
That they may be doing this in a way that's self-harming, and you are then participating, you are complicit in taking a little piece of their soul every time that you say that, instead of you being the person who says, while I appreciate that, I'm not going to do that, or respect the boundary even if that person didn't set it for you.
Yeah, it's that doubling down that we've talked about that is just like increases the problem, right? Like it is so fucking problematic when you enter into that space of like doubling down on defining your way into being a total racist asshole. Like it's fucked up.
Yeah, we have, I don't know, I think it's a really amazing time with statues coming down and the name changes being reconsidered, and the Black Lives Matter movement and the unifying of the Black and Indigenous community. I feel like there's this power of the descendants of the enslaved and the descendants of the colonized saying, no. This is the end.
Hell yeah.
We are done with it. And it's not going to go down like this anymore. And it's going to get ugly for a little while. But I feel like when we center our most vulnerable population in the ways that we are now, and we come together and we stop fighting over the scraps, and we start seeing that we're no longer the minority, that we're the general majority, and we flip the narrative, that's where the real power is. And I think we are really at a tipping point here, and we have to seize it. So when I hear Flo talk about Measure U, it's like, no, that is not the will of the people, and you all work for us. And I think we have gotten so far away from how this is supposed to work, that we will be happy to teach you how it's supposed to work.
Hell yeah.
Right.
Well, hey, Britta,
I mean,
Dave.
I was gonna wrap it up with a question on: is there anything you want to leave people with? But you just fucking nailed that. But you know, if there is one thing, perhaps, you know, most of our listeners are either journalists, politicos, state workers, and leftists. What should they know about decolonization and their next steps?
I think you start including more voices in decision making, and I think you allow people to present themselves in the way that they feel most comfortable, not the way you feel most comfortable. And so the conversation can, well, my light is freaking out. The conversation can be on their terms, and that's the way that it has to happen. And you have to allow yourself to be uncomfortable in order to learn. So yes, I think there are ways to engage people in productive conversation and be an active listener and an active learner. I don't speak for all Native people. I'm just really excited about how things are happening right now and the unity that I'm seeing amongst kind of the Black and Brown communities. And it's just a very exciting time. I work at a minority-run organization, which like I said, is general majority. But I have the ability to be in a space that caters to Black and Brown and marginalized folks. And so I know that I've got a luxury and a privilege in that. And I think we have to allow for leadership at all levels and make sure that we're inclusive. Actually, it should be the preference. I mean, we get to use Indian preference at my organization, and I think other organizations should be looking at their boards and their leadership teams. And if it's not 50-50, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Say that real loud.
Yeah. Well, Britta, thank you so much for coming on. You are incredible. SNAHC is incredible. This running thing that you and Flo do is incredible.
But I don't know about that.
I like it.
Shannon's not into it.
I'm not trying to yuck your yum, but
Shannon, you could totally be on our team. There, you'd enjoy it.
Girl,
can I say one
you'd
thing?
never do it again, and that's okay.
Go for it.
I know that Skylar and Dave, I see both of your faces, and I see that you happen to be white men. And I just think that I don't want anyone to think that we are anti-white or there's no space for white people. I've got fantastic white allies and people who want to be white allies, and I push them over the edge of ally to accomplice. And please don't go where I can't go. And if you've got space where you can go, take me with you. It can happen, and I know that it's amazing, and I see it every day at work. I've got fantastic white folks who work with me, and they will take on battles that I don't have to take on. And I just appreciate both of you for inviting me and listening, and I know this can be uncomfortable, but I also just really want to say thank you for listening and hearing me, and to these two amazing women, Shannon and Flo. I'm down for these conversations all the time. I know we always have to get into the history to kind of set the stage, but there's so much modern indigenization that's happening. I'd love to get more into that if we ever have time.
Oh, we got time. We do
Literally anytime you want to come on.
Yep. Just let us know.
Did we just find our fifth host?
We found a fifth host. Skylar's like, oh shit, more to edit.
All right.
Not to loop in 5 people's audio. This is gonna be.
Here we go.
Yeah, but thank you guys for having me, everyone.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for coming on and spending your evening talking to us. These kinds of conversations are really valuable at any time, but I think especially like now is an important time for this conversation. And I feel like it's a serious point of privilege for me not to just get to like have this conversation with people like yourself, but to really get to learn, you know, to have this platform to do this is really special to me. And it doesn't mean anything without folks like you to come on and share your experiences with us. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for making that space.
Flo and Shannon, you want to pile on before we run out?
Oh Lord,
Britta knows.
I want Shannon to cry again.
I love it. Shannon waxed poetic earlier and had me like, cried as well. Britta, I love the work that you're doing at SNAHC. As somebody who does public health work, obviously FQHCs are, you know, where a lot of the care that so many people in our community go to, you know, to receive that care. And so just the fact that you were willing to take time out in a really busy time when we know that you are fighting so many fights on so many fronts is just a real honor and a pleasure. And I know you're going to be up at like 4 o'clock in the morning going for like a 13-mile run. So I just appreciate you even staying awake long enough to be with us this evening. Truly like was germinating some things over here as you were talking about just how deep this goes, because as we're trying to unpack colonization, I think you hit on some really key points around what this means and how pervasive it is in every single aspect of our lives. And so I'm so thankful that you were able to come on here and be a part of this conversation and explore this with us. And the fact that you showed up in your Caucasian shirt is like an added bonus. So if you're not watching on YouTube, you should check out her shirt because it's amazing.
Last 2 episodes now, yeah.
Yes. So thank you, Britta.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, anytime we do this pile on, it gets awkward. But it's necessary, I think, to just like honor this, honor you and the space that you rightfully get to take up here tonight. I think we all feel that sense of privilege that you were willing to give us a little bit of your time, a lot of your fucking time. Like, you're a busy person. So I guess I just want to like acknowledge that it is absolutely wonderful to sit in a room with 2 dudes who want to have these conversations and an Indigenous woman who speaks truth to power and doesn't fuck around with that. And you've set the record. I cried like 4 times during this show. So I am grateful. I'm going to fucking do it again. Thank you for being here.
Well, I do coffee and I like food. So if you ever want to get together and chat, just make sure there's food.
As soon as I feel safe, yes.
Yes, seriously.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, guys, speaking of being an extremely busy person, I was laid off due to COVID-19. So
sorry to hear
that's
that,
not how it's going for me.
Thank you for sharing that with us. This is the first we're learning about it, and I'm really devastated to hear
like
that.
Of course, I did. You know, I don't want to like make the whole thing about me, but I wanted to get this off my chest. So I have all this free time because I don't go to like work, you know, work, quote unquote.
What is work?
You know, so I've been spending all my time delving through the internet and like going through like really combing the internet for great content. I've been looking for great podcasts, great pieces to read. But I feel like I've come to sort of the end of what I can find on the internet. And so I was hoping that one of you could point me at maybe like a website or somewhere where there's like a lot of this great content for me to enjoy and take in.
Right.
Absolutely.
I should tell you that I'm somewhat of a connoisseur and that only the most perfect of takes will do. So that please don't point me in any whack bullshit.
Yeah. Well, let me hop in and just say, you know, to echo Flo, we're sorry to hear about your situation.
Yeah.
But
thanks, guys.
We're here for you in any way we can be.
Yeah, you just holler.
I will say that there is such a place where you can find perfect take after perfect take after perfect take. And it's
I knew I was asking the right people.
voicesrivercity.com. Currently we're in the podcast iteration. We're over 70 episodes in. We're actually getting like 500 downloads a week right now.
Wow.
Most episodes are getting like nearly 100 views on YouTube. So it's happening, right?
Really cool.
That's really cool. Yeah.
I'm going to cry again.
With all of this, we're also going to start amping up some other things on the website. We obviously had a community essay coming at the city attorney recently, and how they tend to only go after our poorest and our Black and brown communities. And you expect plenty more of that. I just had a talk with a friend about amping that up. We've got the Follow the Money project. We're working on that on District 3, the Board of Supervisors race. A lot of money going into that from Republicans all over the state. A lot of cops giving monies to the Republican running that race, so it's a biggie. We have just weird essays. We have weird write-ups. It's a weird site. Just like poke around on there and see what you can find. We
Perfectly
are on,
weird, though.
Yeah, everything's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
All the
Right,
times.
right.
We're on Facebook, Voices River City, Twitter at Voices River City, Instagram at Voices River City, and it's very, very funny. Skylar always does our post there. And then we are on YouTube, as I said, Voices River City, and increasingly it's more and more fun to watch. So just check last episode, the first 3 minutes, if you don't believe me there. And then I am on, oh, right. We're also, if you want to help us out, we are on Patreon, patreon.com/voicesrivercity. You can go as low as $5 a month. That's a beer at the bar that you're not going to right now, if you know what's up. And we will be having some sort of like special Patreon content. If you don't have the $5 a month to pay, hit me up. I'll send you a link. You can still get that content. I am on Twitter at Kempa.
I'm Guillotine for you. That's Guillotine, the number 4, YOU.
I am Shan N.D. Stevens, and I'm no longer sorry about this thing with Taurine. I think.
Wow, now we got.
I'm gonna just go to like
Fuck
Shannon
you,
the
Taurine.
Crier. Shannon, no, God,
Oh.
come on.
I heard what you
I'm
said.
the asshole.
Shannon's throwing down on Taurine now.
What I'm
All right.
saying is, I am still sorry, but not in terms of my Twitter handle. I'm not thinking about changing it to anything but Shannon the Crier, which is it goes against anything.
That's good.
It goes against everything that I have ever stood for, because I'm salty.
That's a good Twitter handle for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Here's our
It
salty.
is. And I am Flojaune. That's Flojaune.
Britta, sorry, Flo.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and Britta.
Yeah, if there's anywhere on the internet that you would like people to know about you and follow you, let us know.
Sure. So our website is www.snahc, like the snack.org. And then our Instagram is SACNAHC, so at SACNAHC. And then we also have a Facebook page, Sacramento Native American Health Center. And we have a
Great.
Twitter too, but I don't remember what it is. I think it's SACNAHC also.
If you look for it, I'm sure you can find
I'm
it.
sure. Yeah.
Cool.
I was gonna
Well,
say, I could
once again,
probably
thank
search.
you. I thought this was so informative and fantastic, and you are literally welcome on any time. So
yes.
Yeah.
Your lights are trying to get you to go to bed.
I know.
Yeah,
It's
there's like-
really crazy. It's like
There's
it
some
keeps, I'm
ghost
like,
action happening in your house.
something
right
is happening.
So yeah, that's it. Let's call it.
I'm still
Okay.
sorry, Taurine. I am.
No, we're beyond that.
We already
Yeah,
heard what you
shit,
said
Taurine.
about
Now we're like,
Taurine.
fuck you, Taurine. That's where
Shannon's
like,
fitting to ride on
I got-
Taurine.
I got super emotional and didn't use my words right.
All right. Well, that's as good a note to end on as any. So, everybody, we will see you. What the fuck is today? Like I said, I'm unemployed.
Yeah.
It's the day that ends in Y.
See you next
We'll see you in
Tuesday.
a few days. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Don't
Thank
leave yet,
you.
Britta.
Oh.